It was still dark outside when the 911 call came in. March 14, 2008. Linwood, Washington. A small suburban town just north of Seattle. The kind of place where porch lights glow, not out of fear, but habit. Nothing really bad ever happens here. Until that morning. The call came from a modest apartment complex. A place run by a non-profit, designed to shelter teens aging out of foster care. A safe space, or so it was meant to be. But what officers walked into that morning was the aftermath of a nightmare. Marie Adler, 18 years old, opened the door barefoot, her bathrobe barely clinging to her shaking frame. Her eyes, wide and distant, like she was there, but also somewhere else entirely. She looked like a shadow of someone still trying to make sense of what had happened. What she said next froze the officers in place. "A man broke in," she whispered. "He had a knife. He tied me up, blindfolded me, raped me." Her voice was soft, almost too calm. Too calm, the officers thought. She explained how he forced his way in while she slept, bound her wrists with shoelaces, held a blade to her throat, then blindfolded her, violated her, and took photos, before he vanished into the dark. But not before delivering one final warning. "Don't tell anyone, or I'll come back." But Marie told. She did what so many victims never do. She reached out. She trusted. She believed she'd be protected. And for a brief moment, it seemed like someone was listening. But then, something changed. The room grew heavy. The officers began exchanging glances. Marie wasn't crying. She wasn't hysterical. In fact, she was too composed, too quiet, too put together. And just like that, suspicion entered the story. Not toward the man who had broken in, but toward Marie. Her trauma didn't look the way they expected it to. She didn't behave like the kind of victim they were used to. And by the time the sun had fully risen over Linwood, the investigation had already begun to collapse. Not because of what Marie had said, but because of what they thought she should have looked like when she said it. A young woman had cried out, and already, no one believed her. Marie's story didn't unfold the way the detectives expected. There was no sobbing, no dramatic breakdown, no textbook performance of trauma. She answered their questions, but her words were jumbled. Her memory was patchy. She seemed unsure. At times, she smiled, awkwardly, inappropriately. To the officers in the room, it was a red flag. To any trauma expert, a symptom. But there were no trauma experts in that room. Just two men trained to spot deception. And they believed they had found it. The inconsistencies in her timeline, the uncertainty about what she was wearing, the confusion over whether the attacker had removed his mask. They didn't see a girl in shock. They saw a girl making something up. Then came the whisper that sealed her fate. Marie's former foster mother, someone she trusted, leaned in and quietly told the police. "I don't know. I think she's doing this for attention." That was all they needed. The tone in the room shifted, subtly at first, then sharply. Gone was the concern. Gone was the gentle questioning. In its place came suspicion, interrogation, pressure. They sat her down in the harsh fluorescent light of the station, asking her the same questions again, and again, and again. "Why did you wait to tell us this? Are you sure this happened? Do you know it's illegal to lie to police?" Marie, already confused, shaken, and deeply ashamed, began to doubt her own memory, her own mind, her own voice. She had never been in trouble before, never stood in a police station. Now, the men in uniform weren't protecting her. They were circling her, cornering her. She started second-guessing herself. Maybe she had misremembered. Maybe she had made a mistake. Maybe, just maybe, if she said what they wanted to hear, this nightmare would end. After 24 hours of psychological suffocation, Marie broke. She looked up at her interrogators, her voice flat, hollow, and small. "I made it up," she said. The air in the room changed instantly. What had been a rape investigation became a criminal one against her. They didn't question her mental state. They didn't ask why she'd lie. They didn't stop to wonder what could have pushed her to such a confession. They simply handed her a written statement and told her to sign. Marie Adler, just 18 years old and still carrying the wounds of an attack she never imagined she'd have to defend, was now officially a criminal in the eyes of the law. She was charged with filing a false report, fined $500, ordered into counseling for her dishonesty, and told to write a letter of apology to the officers. They made her say sorry for surviving. They stamped her name with a label she would carry for years. Liar. Case closed. No more investigation. No DNA test. No follow-up. Her file went into a drawer and gathered dust. But outside that drawer, far beyond the city of Linwood, in a place no one yet suspected, the real rapist was still out there. And he was watching. And he would strike again. At this point, what do you think Marie should have done better? 2 years had passed since Marie Adler had been silenced. Her story, cast off as a lie, was just another closed file collecting dust. But in Golden, Colorado, justice had unfinished business. A college student was sleeping alone in her apartment. She had brushed her teeth, checked her phone, locked the door, and drifted off to sleep. But she never heard him come in. He moved like a shadow, silent, calculated, cold. She woke up with a hand clamped over her mouth and a knife pressed to her throat. The man wore a black mask. He bound her wrists with shoelaces from her own sneakers, blindfolded her, and then he raped her. He whispered threats in her ear, took photographs, left with the same silence he came in. When the survivor found her way to the police, she was terrified, but brave. She gave her statement, one horrifying detail at a time. Her story wasn't just disturbing. It was familiar. Detective Stacy Galbraith took the case. She'd seen crimes like this before, but something about this one clung to her. It was methodical, too calculated to be random, too cruel to be isolated. She couldn't let it go. And just days later, another report came in. Different city, different woman, same story. Masked man, shoelaces, blindfold, rape, photos. It was identical. The two detectives, both women, both experienced, connected. They shared files, compared notes, and what they saw terrified them. They were dealing with a serial predator. But this wasn't a man who made mistakes. He was precise, disciplined, invisible. They began calling him the Ghost. No DNA, no fingerprints, no witnesses, just a wave of shattered lives left in his wake. While most would chase dead ends, Galbraith and Hendershot dug deeper. They retraced timelines, scanned national crime databases, cross-referenced old sexual assault reports, and then, buried deep in a neglected archive from Linwood, Washington, they found something. A report. 2008. Marie Adler, 18 years old, claimed she was raped in her apartment. Blindfolded, tied up, threatened, photographed. But then, she recanted. The case had been dismissed, filed under false report. Galbraith's blood ran cold. What if Marie hadn't lied? What if no one believed her? What if the first chance to stop this predator had been missed, and more women paid the price? As Detective Stacy Galbraith and Edna Hendershot sat at their desks, piecing together the jigsaw of terrifyingly similar rape cases from across Colorado, they noticed a chilling thread weaving through the crimes, a pattern too exact, too intentional to be coincidence. Each victim told the same story. A man who watched them, waited, struck in the dead of night, tied them with shoelaces, raped them methodically, coldly, like it was a routine, then left, taking pieces of their privacy with him, photos, tokens, silence. But then came a moment of gut-stopping déjà vu. As Galbraith cross-referenced old databases, a particular case popped up. A name, a place. Marie Adler, Linwood, Washington, 2008. The report was almost identical to the Colorado assaults, right down to the shoelaces. But unlike the others, Marie's case had been closed, filed away, dismissed, labeled false report. And yet, her words mirrored those of the victims in Colorado. Galbraith sat back in her chair. The air in the room felt suddenly heavier. Could it be? She picked up the phone and dialed the Linwood Police Department. What she heard chilled her more than any crime scene. They told her, flatly, that Marie had confessed to lying. They'd even made her sign a retraction. There was no DNA evidence collected. No real follow-up. The case had been all but buried. Galbraith pressed for more details, but there was none. Just silence and shame. She hung up and looked across at Hendershot. The question hung in the air between them. What if she was telling the truth, and no one believed her? The implications were monstrous. Not just for Marie, but for every woman who came after her. The monster was behind bars. The photos were real. The timestamp aligned. And the story Marie had once whispered, shaking and alone in a police station, was now undeniable fact. But the damage had already been done. Back in Linwood, Washington, the news spread in hushed tones. Marie Adler, that girl, the one they said cried wolf, was telling the truth all along. Her name, dragged through the mud. Her dignity, questioned. Her sanity, doubted. She had been charged with filing a false report. Forced to apologize to the police. To her foster parents. To her community. She had been told she was wrong. Delusional. Attention-seeking. Now, those same people sat in silence, reading the headlines. Watching the news. Realizing they had helped bury a living truth. When detectives presented the evidence to the Linwood Police Department, the silence was deafening. There were no immediate press conferences. No grand admissions of failure. Just an internal murmur, "We need to clean this up." Eventually, a short, formal apology was issued to Marie Adler. Not in person. Not in public. Not with the weight of the shame they should have carried. Just a few typed words. Cold. Clinical. Detached. As if a paragraph could undo years of psychological torment. But Marie, she was not the same girl anymore. She had been homeless for a time. Jobless. Alone. She had moved from apartment to apartment, trying to escape the whispers. Trying to forget the feeling of betrayal that clung to her like a second skin. She started to believe the lies they told her. That she was crazy. That she had made it all up. The night O'Leary was arrested, Marie received a call from one of the Colorado detectives. They didn't just confirm she was right. They thanked her. Because her report, the one everyone had thrown away, had helped crack the case wide open. Without Marie, O'Leary might never have been caught. More women would have suffered. More victims would have been forced into silence. And yet, her vindication came wrapped in grief. Not only had she been raped, she had been betrayed by every institution meant to protect her. Law enforcement. Social services. Even the foster mother who had raised red flags instead of holding her hand. The state agreed to a $150,000 settlement. But no amount of money could return her lost years. No check could erase the scars. She never used the money to celebrate her victory. She used it to survive. To restart. To reclaim what she could of her peace. Meanwhile, the officers involved in her case were sent to additional training. No firings. No charges. Just some PowerPoint slides and policies rewritten in bureaucratic language. Trauma-informed interviewing. Cognitive recall practices. Victim sensitivity. Buzzwords stacked over the wreckage of a girl they once dismissed. Marie didn't do interviews. Didn't write a memoir. Didn't post her side of the story on social media. She quietly changed her name. Moved to a new city. And began the painstaking process of building a life not defined by victimhood, but by strength. And though she never sought the spotlight, her story eventually reached millions, when her case inspired a Pulitzer Prize-winning article and later, a Netflix miniseries titled Unbelievable. But Marie never watched it. Some truths are just too painful to relive. For the world, her story became a cautionary tale. For the justice system, an example of how easily they can fail. But for Marie, it was simply her life. stolen, broken, and pieced back together by her own quiet resilience.